Hello and welcome. You're watching The Mint. I'm Andy Hodges, and this is ZTM Prime, broadcasting to you from our studios in Harare, Zimbabwe. With the United Kingdom, third ambassador to Zimbabwe, recently pledging to strengthen relations and cooperation with Zimbabwe, it looks as if, as I said yesterday in part one of this discussion, the sometimes fraught friendship between the two nations, the UK and Zimbabwe, may be on the mend. New British Ambassador to Zimbabwe, Mr. Peter Voles, expressed his country's readiness to scale up relations with Zimbabwe on all fronts. He said, and I quote him, "My role is to strengthen relations with Zimbabwe." Today on the Mint is part two of British-Zim relations, the way forward. Continuing our discussion, I ask, what is the UK doing in Zimbabwe as far as trade and aid are concerned? How can Zimbabwe benefit from the academic heritage of the UK? And how best can Zimbabwe and the UK improve their bilateral relationships? Join me and my guest, Zimbabwe's new British ambassador, right here, Mr. Peter Voles, on The Mint. Don't go away. We will be right back. Welcome back. I'm Andy Hodges, and this is The Mint live on ZTM Prime. As I said, I'm joined for part two of our discussion, British-Zim relations, the way forward, by the British ambassador to Zimbabwe. In fact, he's only a few weeks old, Mr. Pete Voles. Pete, one of the functions of an embassy, of course, is to look after your own nationals, British nationals. But there is obviously the support that may be required by Zimbabweans who have acquired British nationality, so maybe they're dual citizens. What type of support does a British embassy give them or give to those people?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, you're right, Andy. Our job part of our job is to look after British citizens in Zimbabwe. And what's really great is that if you are, it doesn't matter how you got your passport, when you got your passport, if you've got a British passport, we treat you as a British citizen. So for those Zimbabweans who've gone to the UK, who've got British passport citizenship and then come back to Zimbabwe, you are British. And I think it's a really great sort of the changing face of the British community in Zimbabwe, because you've got this community of people that have a Zimbabwean heritage but are actually now British. So you get the same as me, as a British citizen.
Okay, I'm going to throw this one at you, because every Zimbabwean I talk to has a complaint about your embassy, and that is the ability to get visas. They seem to find it a nightmare. They're either rejected. In fact, someone close to us, we were talking to someone yesterday, and he's a very senior guy, and his son is studying in the UK. He was refused a visa to go for his graduation, and this is a big complaint. Okay, what's going on?
Well, Andy, I am so sorry to you and to your viewers for any kind of anguish over visas. I think everywhere in the world is facing a bit of a challenge on visas. Certainly post-COVID, there was a massive backlog globally in terms of the visa, and I think we're just about caught up with all our visa operations. But it's deeply frustrating if you want to go to a graduation, as you say, or you want to, and you find it a challenge getting a visa. So I'm sorry. I think that's.
But I think you explained something though, because it's something I found out when I was looking into this. These things are not issued here, are they?
They're not issued.
They're not issued right here at the embassy.
They're not issued here at the embassy.
And I think that is, people don't understand.
Yeah,
that.
no, it's a common misconception. We don't process the visas themselves here. We have a centre in town that does a verification of documents, and they're processed either in South Africa or in Kenya, where we have, because there's an economies of scale and doing it in one place rather than trying to every embassy have its own visa. So that's just about being a more efficient government.
And this issue of being like refused or rejected. I mean,
there's
some appeals and things. I know I'm putting you on the spot, but you can appreciate that this is what people care about.
It's an important question. People care about it, and it's important that you ask me those questions, so thank you. I think sometimes, and not always, but sometimes it's because people haven't filled in the forms correctly or followed the online guidance or done it too late, haven't planned ahead. So, just encourage people to do the planning ahead, make sure that they fill the forms in correctly, do it, or simplify the process. And then I think, there is, and then go through the process. But I can only say, it's something that we have a WhatsApp group across ambassadors, heads of mission across the world, and we all talk about this because it's a one thing that we hear a lot from
all other countries.
It's not just Zimbabwe. It's across the world. People tell wherever you are, people raise visas with us as heads of mission, and we all want to get it faster, better, more efficient, because, as you say, it's really frustrating.
Now, let's moving on. One thing I know you have a passion about, which is interesting, is Zimbabwean culture. And I think, as of course British, you've lived here, you've seen the two sides of it, if I can call it, the British culture, the Zimbabwean culture, even the African culture. So what do you like best about our culture? Or do you like our culture? What best do you like, I suppose?
There's a real risk, Andy, as a foreigner, as a British foreigner, making a comment on someone else's culture, of course. I would be slightly careful about that. But if you were to push me enough to ask, I think there's a lot about Zimbabwean culture that I really respect. I really respect the way that elders are respected and that social norms. It comes out in greetings. I love the way the greetings work. I like it comes out in the language and how you use the different language for respect and etc. So I think that's a really strong part of it. I'm showing my age here, but I'm a bit of a Sungura fan. I'm a Lena Jakarta, Mutukudzi. And I love all the kind of moral messages that come through in the music and about respecting your elders and about sort of humility of leaders and all these things that come through. So those sort of things are really.
I think from my perspective, without putting words in your mouth, I also like that the way we used to be, if I can call it that, to the way we are now, which is a bit different.
And certainly in the UK, I think we could learn a lot. We can learn a lot from that sort of just the way that kind of respect in society works in Zimbabwe. So something I really admire.
Now, of course, one important, you said this, you said the president himself said this to you and said it to his Zimbabwean diplomats, that it's not a holiday camp, you got to go out there and work. So let's talk about the work that your embassy actually does. We have been talking about a lot of it, but well, what do you do here in Zimbabwe to support British nationals? What impact? Oh, sorry. Let me put it this way. Have you met people, Zimbabweans, that have impacted British culture? Have you met any of those or had any interactions with Zimbabweans that have done that?
So I'm still a bit new, and so I haven't, obviously, and I'm based here in Harare, so I haven't met that many Zimbabweans in Britain yet making contribution in Britain, but really aware of it. We see it across the sporting, see the number of Zimbabwean footballers in the Premier League. We see in technology, in arts, in the film industry. We see, I met a couple of some academics. We've got lots of Zimbabwean academics working in British universities.
I know a guy who's responsible for the upkeep of a House of Commons.
Amazing.
Can you believe
Amazing.
It? And
Brilliant.
Zimbabwean friend of mine. Unbelievable.
So it's great. And actually, when I get back to I'll go back to the UK probably a couple of times a year, and I look forward to, when I do go back, to making sure that I'm meeting some of those Zimbabwean communities, some of those diaspora who are making real contributions in the UK, and just to have a few more stories. So the next time we meet, I can answer that question a bit more fully.
Now, let's get into the crux. Now we've got that. Let's look at the crux of this. We're talking here about trade. We're talking about your embassy's work on aid. And where is the UK government? Where is the embassy putting most of its efforts and funding into at the moment?
Thanks, Andy. So if I can start with the development, the aid bit of it. So we've been committed development partner in Zimbabwe for years, decades. We work in education, in health, in climate change, all these things where we spend UK taxpayers' money. So the revenue, from my taxes every month, everyone goes into, and we spend that here in Zimbabwe on things that benefit Zimbabweans. So, for instance, in education, I don't need to tell Zimbabweans about how important education is. Zimbabweans are probably the most committed around the world in terms of education. But we are the largest. I think we spent about £250 million over the last 12 years on education in Zimbabwe in rural primary and secondary schools. I went last week to Lupani district, as I said yesterday, to a primary school to see some of that work, and you can see the investment in teacher training, the investment in kit for the schools and infrastructure. Well, really great. I met the village chief, or the community chief, and the village headman, and the school development committee, and heard about how they'd been using these school improvement grants. So what we do is we give the school a grant, and then it decides how to spend that money. So the school development committee of parents sit round and work out, actually what we want in our kids' school is we need to replace the floor in this classroom. So again, a really great example of kind of our support, but Zimbabweans and local communities improving
Just
their
sort of saying, this is what we need. So it's sort of community-based
and we actually give them
needs.
the money. We don't do it ourselves. We say, here's the money, right?
Okay.
And so what they do is the headmaster buys the cement, and the community decides to put the labour in, or whatever it is. So, and I sat in the class with the kids in a lesson where the teacher was using an iPad, and all the kids had iPads in front of them, and they were learning about the digestive system. It was just nice, important basic stuff about education that we do. We work on, at the other end of the scale, on climate change. We work in really vulnerable communities like Bingo and Chipinge, where we're helping kind of the early warning systems for when there's a drought coming, cyclone, how you make sure people get access to water and clean water supplies, how solar power, so there's kind of renewable energy. So quite a lot of things we do across the development sort of field. I spent most of my career in development, and I think the one thing I'd say at this point is that no country wants to be dependent on foreign aid. So whilst it's important, and it makes an important contribution, it is ultimately it's a trade and investment that will make a real difference in Zimbabwe.
You also did something. Aren't you doing a lot of work on gender-based violence? Are you involved with the Spotlight initiative?
So we're very involved in particularly in support. Well, there's a bit about gender violence, but also supporting adolescent girls. One of the key challenges actually in Zimbabwe is that often girls drop out of school for various reasons, and so we've got a program that supported, I think, 13,000 young women, young adolescent girls, helping them get back into the school. I tweeted yesterday about a young woman called Nontokozo.
You have to get
yes. And she had to drop out of school because she didn't have access to a wheelchair.
Oh, right.
And so the program has helped her get a wheelchair, get glasses. She's sitting at O-levels. She wants to be a computer scientist.
Oh, that's so nice.
It's a nice personal story about something helping kids, in particular adolescent girls, get back into school.
How much money? I mean, maybe you don't have the numbers because I know it comes to different. It doesn't come directly to the embassy. It may come through different agencies. But how much money do you believe the UK, and aid-wise or development, is spending in Zimbabwe?
It's about $100 million a year the UK spends on aid in Zimbabwe.
Now, one important aspect of your mission is promoting trade, boosting trade between our two countries. And that kind of, it seems to be that there was UK used to be our major trading partner. Of course, over the years, with the relationship waning, that has gone off a bit. What is your goals? What is your mission in terms of promotion of trade between the nations?
Yeah, well, as I said, I think that, and I think evidence globally suggests that trade and investment is a way to countries' development. The president thinks that too. Really, very clearly talking about the importance of trade. For me, there are two angles to it. There's one is about helping Zimbabwe, supporting Zimbabwe export. So you remember in the 1990s, Zimbabwean produce was, in Europe,
Marks and Sparks
everywhere. And it's still there. It's there now, and it's growing back again, and that's really good. So they're helping because the exports bring foreign currency, and when it's done well, they bring jobs to people in Zimbabwe. They bring kind of benefits to communities. So, and actually, I'm maybe speaking out of turn. I'm not so worried about whether it's exports to Britain. I think exports or anywhere is good for, if it's done well, is good for Zimbabwe. And so, promoting exports, and particularly things like in the horticulture sector, we talked about, there's sort of, I'm going to go and see in a few weeks' time in Mutare, I'm going to go and see a kind of chili project where they're exporting to the UK. But also the mining sector, a good example of of exports when done well. I went to a mine last week in Mat South where they're processing lithium. It's a company that's listed in the British Stock Exchange, but exporting to China, and doing a really great job at the community and social safeguards. Right. It's done really well, and I think when you do it well, and you see, I met the community members who are now driving the excavators and running the plant. I mean, it's a really great story of community involvement,
bringing everybody together.
Exactly.
I mean, that's how it must be.
And giving creating jobs for people. So those exports are the key thing. Secondly, though, I think investment's important. That's about money coming into the country. So how you bring expertise and you bring capital into the country. The UK, we invest in the renewable sector, so solar. Good example in the health sector. We've got a company building 30 health clinics. We invested in the Bayat Bridge border post. And actually many household names in Zimbabwe have got UK finance in them. Labels, Cairns, Liquid, Fibre. They've all got UK money coming into them. And that's really important for helping bring expertise and cash to Zimbabwe.
Now, there's one issue, of course, what I would suppose people will always call the elephant in the room, and that's sanctions.
Sanctions.
And of course, the way that sanctions may restrict UK companies wanting to come here and invest. I know that you were at the Zimbabwe International Trade Fair, second time, I believe, in 20 years. Last year, I met some. In fact, I met some of your guys there this year. Sanctions. This is an issue that we obviously need to discuss.
Yeah, Muvunzo wenyu wakakosha. It's an important question, and it's the one that everyone wants to ask.
Oh, brilliant.
So it's a really important question, and I think first of all, no country wants to have sanctions against another country. That's just not how anyone sets out to run. All we talked about today, all we talked about yesterday about having a mature relationship, one of partner, one of equality, one of respect, and no one wants to have sanctions against another country. I should just, the real popular misconception in Zimbabwe is that people believe that the UK has sanctions, sort of economic sanctions against Zimbabwe. It isn't the case at all. There are just 5 people, Vanu Vashanu Chete Chete, 5 people in Zimbabwe who we have sanctions against. And those 5 people can't do business in the UK, they can't travel to the UK, they won't get a visa to the UK. But everybody else, 16 million other people, have complete freedom, as we talked about with visas, but complete freedom to trade, to invest. We have the best trade terms across in Zimbabwe. It's a duty-free, quota-free trade terms. So all the investment I talked about.
Well, I tell you what, I think let's get into this. I want to take a bit of a breather, then we'll continue this discussion.
Please.
I think we need to thrash this out. You, of course, are watching The Mint, and I'm here with the British Ambassador to Zimbabwe, Mr. Pete Vowles. Of course, don't go away. We're going to continue the discussion. We're talking sanctions. We'll be right back.
We are a special day today here in Harare. It's the inaugural show of the Phoenix podcast.
The story of Africa is really a story about rising from the ashes.
I'm privileged to be sitting in Dubai, and I'm here today in this city of Hoi An in Vietnam. And he's the Amazon #1 seller of a new book called Take Charge. She's one of the most famous celebrity chefs in Vietnam.
You just have to speak it into the universe. When you say something, the universe listens. God listens.
But more importantly, we're talking about having the ability to believe in yourself. Because if we want to make our children, it's not what we do for them that will make them, but it's what we don't do for them that makes them. If you want to be a global player, listen to the future. You can't become the pearl without the irritation.
You have to go through that pressure. It's what's going to make you shine.
Those things that I fell down actually helped me appreciate how to get up again. And every time I got up, I was stronger. Because there's nothing as powerful as an idea whose time has come.
Welcome back. You're watching The Mint. I'm Andy Hodges, and this is TM Prime. I, of course, am sitting with the British Ambassador to Zimbabwe, Pete Vowles. In fact, he's only been here a couple of weeks, and a Shona-speaking British Ambassador to Zimbabwe. Pete, before the break, we were talking about a critical issue here in sanctions, okay? And you were just explaining about the fact that the UK doesn't have sanctions on Zimbabwe except for 5 people. But there is an issue here. The issue, of course, is the legacy of sanctions in the sense that companies would look at Zimbabwe, they'll look at, say, Botswana, Zambia, Malawi, and say, look, is it worth our hassle to go into Zimbabwe, particularly when there's due diligence, more due diligence is demanded, the banks want to know who we're trading with, if we transfer money in and out of Zimbabwe, it becomes a problem, the US banks may want to do some due diligence on us. That is what's restricting, I think, to a big degree, trade.
Yeah, as you said before the break, it's a really important question and really serious question for Zimbabwe. And just as you say, 5 people, only 5 people, everybody else, there are no sanctions. And that is sometimes misunderstood and misrepresented. But you're right, and what I agree with you on is that the political messaging about having a sanctions regime, so in Parliament we have a law, there's an act of Parliament for the sanctions regime, and that even though it's just 5 people within it, it creates a political message that I think probably does affect the way people think about Zimbabwe, and I think it is something that we think quite deeply about. But I think that what was really important is that when I spoke to, so the president invited about 18 British businesses over a month ago. They came, all of them were really interested in investing in Zimbabwe, and I met a number of them. I've had a couple of sort of roundtable meetings with British companies, and the sanctions actually doesn't come up top of the list for companies wanting to invest. What comes up first is property rights, is currency stability, is rule of law, protect those kind of issues. And of course we do, and I have to ask the question, but what about sanctions? And I think it plays into some of the things you referenced there, Andy, but it isn't the top of people's minds. That said, absolutely, as I said at the very beginning, if we could find a way to remove that sanctions regime so that all the things I said at the beginning and yesterday, that we can have that kind of regime, then we really...
And how do you think we can do that? From your perspective, I mean, I know, as you said, obviously you're new on the job, but still, I mean, we need to have that dialogue. We need to have that communication. We need to get this understanding that we're open for business. The UK companies can come and do business here. We can do business there. We can export there without any issues, apart from, obviously, the normal regulations. How do we get that out of the world's mind? Because once it's in your mind, it's in your mind.
Yeah, so there's definitely something we need to do about the sanctions itself, and certainly I know that my ministers, the British government sitting in London is looking carefully at Zimbabwe, looking for the signals of reform. We talked about some of those in yesterday about the arrears process and the reforms the government is committed to. They will go a long way to me being able to make the case, which ultimately is my job, to make the case that we should remove those sanctions. And so that's actually something we want to do. But also focus on the really good stuff that's already happening too, because those companies, as you say, if you're thinking about Africa and you're thinking about where to invest, what is it that makes you think about it? Most people actually who come to Zimbabwe, and those I meet, when they get here, they think, wow, this is a great place to invest.
They can't believe what they read in the paper yesterday.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's getting them here, and it's getting them to see that and understand how you do business here. So I also see, I see my role as having a job to make the case with the support of the Zimbabwean government and the conversations we have in private, make the case to the UK, to my own government that these are things we need to address, but also to champion the really good things, all the stuff I've talked about, the investment that is happening today, the investment in everyday brands in Zimbabwe, the investment in imports and exports. And so that people can see to others thinking, okay, how do we get back to the 1990s when you had that level of investment that you referred to earlier? Yeah,
because of course agriculture is a big area, mining is a big area. You mentioned the lithium there. I mean, there are huge opportunities, I believe, looking at the economy here and the various sectors for British companies to do very well. It's just, as you said, getting them here, seeing the opportunities and pitching them correctly.
Yeah. And it's been brilliant to see, I mean, I haven't actually been to any yet, but I'm hoping to see some of how the productivity of farms has increased in recent years. We see the kind of record tobacco exports this year. We see farmers in high value kind of blueberries and chilies, really exploiting the opportunities. So great for Zimbabweans in terms of exports, but also there are lots of opportunities for British firms too, and not just British. I mean, as a British ambassador, I feel like I'm compelled to talk about British. But ultimately, it's about. I mean, I think what matters for Zimbabwe is exports more broadly anywhere that brings in foreign currency and doing good business that helps communities.
Yeah. Now, of course, you're out of you're Brexited out, so it's EU and the UK. That's another discussion for another day. Yeah. Now, one thing that the UK government over the many years has always put a priority and put money into is education. I think that's been one major flag bearer of your embassy. And also, of course, the other side, UK scholarships, because a lot of Zimbabweans have gone to school. I mean, gone to school in the UK, many of us. So can you tell us more about these scholarships, the opportunities open for scholarships for youngsters in the country?
Yeah, we have a really good, really inspiring program called the Achieving Scholarships that you probably heard us. We've been plugging it on social media for recent weeks endlessly because the deadline was this week for applications, so we were really pushing.
Okay.
We had 2,000 applicants, which is great.
That's brilliant.
And that is a fully funded master's in the UK at a university of your choice to do a subject of your choice. We don't try and dictate it. Anything you want to do.
Very nice.
The only criteria is you need to be able to tell us what you will do with that, with the skills you get, and how you will contribute back to Zimbabwe. Okay. So it's a really, that's why we do it. We do it so that around the world. Actually, tonight we're celebrating 40 years of Achieving. We've got a meeting, a whole range of them. We've had about 500, 600 scholars from Zimbabwe over the years. 55,000 worldwide.
Wow.
So it's great, and you get a stipend, so you can afford for living, and you get the year's worth of tuition fees. So yeah, it's a good thing. It's a nice thing for ambassadors to see as well. You meet these young people going off and doing wide range of courses, education, AI, computer science. As long as you can say to us what you're going to do with it when you get home.
Do you believe, just like previous ambassadors, schooling, education, getting girls into school, looking after the girl child, is that something you think is one of your priorities?
I mean, you don't need the British ambassador to say that in Zimbabwe. Zimbabweans are the most committed to education. That is just a national conversation. People really prioritise it. So, but yes, of course. I mean, the global evidence of getting girls in school and the returns you get from an economic and a social benefit are sort of completely clear.
Now, I know that, I believe either your embassy or UK aid programs have been involved in projects to help young people who have left school prematurely. I know that that's a big issue, particularly with COVID, the COVID-19 pandemic. And of course, some of them have left school, they don't have any qualifications. What kind of programs do you have? Do you have any programs at an embassy or through aid helping young people do something meaningful to generate income-generating projects?
So most of those have been focused particularly on adolescent girls, because I guess you sort of have to, when you choose about your think about your resources and how you use them to the most effect. So we focus that on adolescent girls, and I said to helping them get it back into school and stay in school, but also recognising that that's a community that will benefit most from sort of income generating. So we've got a couple of programs that really do that, as you say. Really important, isn't it?
It really is. I mean, and I think there's a lot of emphasis on the girl child, on GBV, which I know because I met one of your colleagues there, one of your staffers there in Avondale, looking at the spotlight with the EU ambassadors funding that, which is great. These are the sort of social programs that you will continue doing, I'm assuming, as the embassy.
Absolutely. We have a program called SAFE, which is particularly about that and about GBV or violence against women and girls. Again, we have to be very careful. Again, back to the whole theme of this conversation, this is not for us to tell people what to do or how to do it, but it's supporting Zimbabwean initiatives, supporting Zimbabweans do things that matter to Zimbabwe, rather than us imposing anything.
Now, you did talk, I believe it was either yesterday's interview or today, because we've been talking extensively about all subjects, about climate projects. Because, of course, renewable energy, climate change is real. Guys, you hear me? Climate change is real. Okay. So what are you doing? Are there any projects you can pinpoint that you're working on, that looking at that climate issue?
Yeah, one of the key sectors that we sort of think that is the prime sort of opportunity for investment is on the renewable energy sector. So solar. Actually, we've just completed solarizing our entire estate here in Harare. So our embassy, all our houses, are all completely on solar. Which I think is the first embassy in the world that we've done that in. Partly because the opportunity is here because of the sunshine, but it's important just in terms of reducing our emissions. And UK companies there's lots to offer in terms of that renewable side. But of course, I think we talked yesterday briefly about the projects we do in Binga and in Chipinge, where they're particularly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. And again, that's sort of community projects where we work with communities on early warning, on clean water, on energy. One of the key challenges: how do you mainstream? That's sort of a terrible jargon word.
No.
But how do you get solar and renewable energy built across everything we do? So I work on schools and primary education, getting solar. The school I went to in Lupani had solar panels on the roof. They were running there using solar power. That's great for the teachers because they all can mark their homework at night, and
kids can do their homework.
Kids can do their homework. So yeah, there's lots of opportunity there, both in protecting the most vulnerable, but also transitioning an economy to be a more greener, cleaner economy.
And yeah, I mean, it has to be. And also, obviously, trying to ensure the SDGs are met, Sustainable Development Goals. I think that's key, and it should be in the focus of everyone's mind, whatever we do, whatever projects we do. It doesn't matter if you're government or private sector. But before I just ask you for your final thoughts and for what you envision seeing going forward, it's more interesting to understand that, you know, the relationship building. I'd like to get back to it because I think that's important. Yeah. You know, this relationship building, because I've always seen it's almost as if it's almost like two people standing on both sides, you know, two sides of a bridge screaming at each other. Whereas meanwhile you should be walking across the bridge and meeting in the middle. So maybe on that note, your final thoughts, your final wishes, what would you like to achieve? Because you see, I mean, you're brand new. You still got a couple of years left, haven't you? How many years you got left?
Hopefully for 4 years.
4 years. Well, there you go. And you say you got 4 years of it.
I've got 4 years, and you're absolutely right. It feels like, and I wasn't here in the 2000s, but it feels like we got to the stage where we were like I don't know whether it's a couple, but we had irreconcilable differences. We couldn't understand each other's perspectives. We lost trust in each other, lost faith in each other, and absolutely we need to. You know, my job is to change that. Is to be able to have the conversations together, to walk across the bridge together. There'll be difficult things, there'll be hurdles on the road, it's not an easy path, but be able to together to identify them and talk about them and remove them. Because if diplomacy is about anything, it's about having, as I said only yesterday, I think, understanding, listening, understanding and dialogue and having those conversations. So what do I want to achieve? You know, I would love it if Zimbabwe were able to rejoin the Commonwealth, we were able to remove the sanctions, we were able to make progress on the arrears clearance, and that $18 billion gap if we were to restructure the debt for Zimbabwe. If we could achieve anything on those three, I can't overpromise them, but that's what I'm here to try to do. And I can do what I can do, and obviously Zimbabwe needs to do what it can do. But that's certainly, if we could get somewhere on those, it would be fantastic.
Peter Wells, British Ambassador to Zimbabwe, thank you so much, sir, for coming and talking to us on The Mint. I really appreciate that.
Thank you for having me.
Well, that's it for The Mint. Join me, of course, at 2 p.m. every day, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday and Friday for The Mint, and Wednesday for Beat the Market, the only show that deep dives into the world of equities, markets and all things finance. Again, I'll see you Monday morning. It's the weekend. Monday morning, 6 a.m. You'll wake up with me for the only show that you want to wake up to watch, and that's Morning Rush. I'm Andy Hodges. Have a great weekend. Goodbye, and please, you all be safe.